May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, our freedom, our eyes. Amen. This sermon is about having love as your eyes. Let's get to it. It's the question of whether you and I see life the way God sees life. And I want to say that this is deeper than a kind of a theological question. It's not a superficial religious, spiritual, theological question. This is down where we live, folks. Do you see life the way God sees life? Is one of the crucial life questions. I'll put it a different way. Sometimes it occurs to me to describe people in this way. She has had a lot of Good Fridays. She has had her share of crucifixions. And she's had more Easter Sundays than Good Fridays. She's had more resurrections than crucifixions. And she, whoever it is I'm talking about, she or he, lives out of the maturity, wisdom, and service that has come from living through both crucifying times and resurrection, new life times. Now, all of us in this room, everybody who's streaming, everybody who will watch this sermon later on, in some way or another, in some degree or another, are facing some form of both crucifixion and resurrection. And the reason I don't say just crucifixion is because at the center of Christian belief and theology is you don't get crucifixions without resurrections being on their way. So it's crucifixion and resurrection. And in the interest of joining you about how I'm preaching this sermon to myself as well as to you, in other words, in the service of transparency, it became clear to me on the journey of composing this sermon that I was developing this sermon about myself, about my impending loss of being in this room with you and this music and this energy come this coming summer. That's going to be a huge loss. So I'm going to preach to myself as well as to you this morning. Now, and I promise you I will not do this every Sunday because I'll get sick of it, and I know you'll get sick of my talking about it too. A little Bible study. By placing this morning's gospel story in Jericho and then coming out of Jericho, that is a suburb of Jerusalem, just like I think 12 miles from Jerusalem. And the road from Jericho to Jerusalem is covered with beggars, with people who are selling tchotchkes, taking advantage of people making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. By placing this morning's gospel story in the suburb of Jerusalem, the writer of the Gospel of Mark is telling us that what is happening is in preparation for Jesus' upcoming crucifixion and resurrection, for what Jesus is going to go through in Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the symbol of crucifixion, resurrection for Jesus and for us. In other words, the gospel story is asking you and me Do we have what we need in preparation for the crucifixions and resurrections that are headed our way? They are headed everyone's way. Nobody gets out of here without crucifixions and resurrections. So are we fortified? Because that's a place where we can dance if we know we're fortified for no matter what's on its way. Last Sunday and this Sunday, we've had two stories. They appear right back to back in the Gospel of Mark. They follow one another because they have the same question posed to Jesus in both stories. The very same question. They want something from Jesus, and Jesus asks the same question to both people. What do you want me to do for you? Now, last Sunday, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, two brothers, asked Jesus if he will guarantee their greatness in this world and in the next. After Jesus asks them, what do you want from me? What do you want me to do for you? And in that, just to remind you, because it flows into this morning's lesson, Jesus had to teach the disciples that the way to form the question about greatness was to ask that when I am undergoing suffering, which Jesus referred to as the baptism Jesus was about to undergo, or the cup that Jesus was about to drink. When I undergo suffering, am I willing to be the servant of all? What a question. Only a question from the house of love could ask that question. It's a tough order, my friends. In the midst of suffering, can we still be servants of grace? Can you go inside the miracle of your life, the miracle of your suffering, which is the name of Mark Nepo's new book, and discover the fact that beneath your suffering, there always is grace? Now, Mark, when he was 34, was diagnosed with a brain tumor the size of half a grapefruit, and he now, at age 65, is living to tell the ongoing story of his being healed of that. Yet he says, in the central passage of the book from my perspective, which we read last Sunday, and let me just repeat it because it flows into the next point that I want to make about our having double fortification for our sufferings and resurrection. He said, during this time, I was unable to find my bearings. I had no sense of center. I was unsure about everything. But in the center of my terror, just imagine when you've had your most terrifying or suffering-oriented moments. In the center of my terror, there was a small voice stirring, emanating, and building from under all my trouble. It did not speak in words, and I was unaccustomed to listening for it or to it. I know now that it came, this still small voice, this whisper, came from the core of all life and all time and began to assert itself through the bottom of my personality, the way sunlight passes through a crack in a barn. This was my first feeling of what he calls the touchstone of grace that would grow and lessen my terror over time. The idea, when you're most in pain, when you're most confused, when you're most in your suffering, to listen beneath all that to the still small voice, which is the touchstone of grace, and to commit yourself to become a servant of that grace, even in the midst of your suffering. That is the path to greatness, according to Jesus. That's the path to greatness, according to Jesus. Now, that was last Sunday. This Sunday, the second kind of co-fortifying experience. In addition to serving grace in the midst of pain and suffering, the second fortification for going into loss, change, suffering, even crucifying moments, when your whole life is coming apart, is this: finding a new way to see. Finding a new way to see the world. Having new eyes. This is what the man asks Jesus when Jesus asked him the same question. Jesus asked the brothers James and John, "What do you want me to do for you?" Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, said, "I want to see. I want to see." Mark Nepo said during that time of horrible suffering, a batched chemotherapy and radiation regimen, he said he wanted to live on the other side of understanding pain and suffering. He said he wanted to know the infinite, and he figured out for some reason that the reason he couldn't grasp it was because he was unable to see and feel its constancy, and so he began to yearn. And the way he puts it is to yearn for my eyes to be rearranged until I could find the infinite with capital I in everything. It's as if what mattered was rooted itself behind my eyes, my mind, and my heart. And he said, it began to happen, and my life became a life of joy. This leads me to want to share with you one of the great set of paragraphs of scriptural quality ever written in the 20th century. Some of you know I have this dream that in retirement I'm going to write a new Bible. It won't replace our beloved Bible, but it's going to be less confusing than the Bible we've got now, because it's only going to be about the house of love and how the house of fear does help you get into the house of love. But it's going to be unconfusingly about the house of love. And I want y'all to pray for it, because I think I can make millions of dollars and then I can give half of it to All Saints Church. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be wonderful. This passage is going in it. It is about a blind Bartimaeus who got a new way of seeing, and it changed his entire life. Before this happened, he was a spiritual elite, and he thought that every part of the narrative that he had been fed about what it meant to be holy was absolutely unambiguously correct. And then all of a sudden, it all got deconstructed and reconstructed in the same moment, and he began to see with new eyes. His name was Thomas Merton. He was a Roman Catholic Cistercian monk. He lived in a closed cloister not far from Louisville, Kentucky. But he got driven to Louisville to see a doctor on March 19, 1958, 17 years after he had become a monk. And all of a sudden, at the corner of Walnut and 4th, where they now have a plaque. He had an epiphany where he got new eyes and saw that his narrative that he had been working out of was all wrong. And God gave him a new narrative. It's beautiful writing, and I will not read the whole thing, but you've got to hear some of it. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I was theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. Merton has a great way of sarcasm. The whole illusion of a separate, holy existence is a dream. Not that I question the reality of my vocation or of my monastic life, but the conception of, quote unquote, separation from the world that we have back home in the monastery too easily presents itself as a complete illusion. The illusion that by making vows, we become a different species of being. We become pseudo-angels. We become spiritual men, in quotes. We become men of interior life, what have you. Then he goes on to talk about the release from this constricted way of living, the blindness in which he had been existing. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud right there in the middle of the street. And I suppose my happiness could have taken form in the words, thank God that I am like other people, that I am only a person among others. To think that for 16 or 17 years, I have been taking seriously this pure illusion that is implicit in so much of our monastic thinking. The other night, a group of us were talking about kind of using the Oprah Winfrey Belief series as a kind of an urban retreat. And one sister in the group raised her hand and she said, "This is not making me feel good." She says, "I feel torn. I feel torn into pieces." And I said, "Are you going to stay afterwards for a little more conversation?" She said, "Yes." So we asked her if she didn't mind talking a little bit more. What we did as we talked, we smoked out the fact that she had been coming to All Saints for about 6 months, and that it was beginning to make her feel uncomfortable because her old way of doing religion was falling apart. And she was between the deconstruction phase and the reconstruction phase. And I said, "Welcome to All Saints." Your life has sailed off the religious map. And all of the religious maps that you have been given all your life, you have discovered are different from the actual terrain. And so now you are having to rely on your own internal guidance system, the God within you. Welcome to the club. Everybody at All Saints has somehow sailed off the map. And all these people came up to her and hugged her afterwards. She said, "Ma, I do feel better." Merton sailed off the map and went to his internal GPS right in the same moment on 4th and Walnut. Oftentimes it takes some of us a little longer. Anyway, he said, "I have the immense joy of being a person a human being, a member of the race in which God himself became incarnate, as if the sorrows and the stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me. Now I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this, with an exclamation point. But it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are walking around shining like the sun. I suddenly saw the secret beauty of everyone's hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach, the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. I saw everybody from God's point of view. If only they could see all themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no war. There would be no more hatred. There would be no more cruelty. There would be no more greed. I suppose the biggest problem we would have would be that we wouldn't get any work done because we would fall down and worship each other. Reminds me of the first time I saw Desmond Tutu. He got down on his knees and genuflected. I said, what is this? And later I understood, but being a competitive person, I got down on my knees and genuflected deeper than he did. But what was going on was Desmond Tutu believes that in certain Anglo-Catholic churches and Roman Catholic churches, you come in and there's a box somewhere with a burning candle on top of it, and that signifies that inside the box is the consecrated bread. That the real presence of Jesus is in the room, and so it's important for you to genuflect. And he says, would that we all knew that the consecrated presence of Jesus is in absolutely every one of us. And we need to be genuflecting before one another. Oh, my. So this is what I'm using as a mantra as I get ready to leave Pasadena and go live in Alabama. Is no matter how much loss, and no matter how much crucifixion and resurrection is there, the issue is, am I going to serve grace in the midst of any suffering and loss? And am I going to have the new eyes that were given to Bartimaeus and to Thomas Merton, that absolutely everyone is walking around shining like the sun, but they don't know it? Today is the last sermon in October, which means it's the last sermon in our stewardship giving month, which means that I want to talk a little bit just about money in conclusion. This is not just about your heart. This is not just about your spiritual journey. What I've been talking about is about your life, our life, everything, including our finances. Fred Borsch was the bishop of this diocese when I first came here 21 years ago. And he told the story of the soldiers who were the military of the Roman occupying empire. And when they got baptized as a result of hearing the good news of Jesus about suffering and service and about new eyes, and about how every crucifixion is followed by resurrection. And they said, yes, I want to be baptized into that. That some of them knew that this meant an end to their violence because they were signing on to nonviolence, and an end to controlling all their money and thinking that absolutely everything they ever had got was their money as opposed to God's. And so some of them, when they went under the baptismal waters, they held the swords and their pocketbooks out and said, baptize me, but not my sword, not my wallet. This is about getting immersed in everything, every part of your life, so that you are pooling your resources in this place to create an atmosphere and a group of people who believe that there is resurrection after every crucifixion, and then in the depths of every crucifixion, there is grace, and that you can see with new eyes and see that absolutely everybody is walking around like the Son, and everybody is God. That is what we give for. That is what we live for. That is what gives us joy. That is what makes us laugh. That is what makes us dance. Amen.